Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Story number 1, Against the Odds, written by a glass of whiskey. The Acnics attacked. We had the south and they had the north part of the hemisphere, as this god-forsaken rock. Apparently, they were not happy with this arrangement and had carefully weighed the pros and cons of the 10 times larger garrison before deciding to move in and take our largest port. Our one and only hope was the alliance of the humans. A full army, or perhaps a special squad of supermarines, had been requested, and the humans had responded. They had sent one man. He looked as if he was about to collapse at any moment, and as old as time itself. "Right, I am assuming command." His voice hit like a sledgehammer. The man must be all lungs, judging by his voice. "Move out immediately. We are going to attack the enemy." The human had sent a commander. He thought to himself, and he started to prepare for moving out. His body continued with the preparations as his thoughts tried to catch up to it. Attack the enemy, are we? Outnumbered 10 to 1. Just going to drive out and say hi to the fortified enemy position. His brain had mixed feelings about this. His body had strong feelings about this. It felt that whatever happened, it did not want to get screamed in the face by the new commander, and carried on with its tasks. The sheer shock of the command seemed to have had a similar effect on everyone else, as they were now mostly ready except for the supplies that had always took a bit longer. "Leave them!" he heard the new commander shout. "We will just use the enemy supplies instead." Thought to himself. Going to attack the enemy that outnumbers us and is fortified, but now without such things as extra bullets or food. Wonderful. There were not a well-equipped garrison. Transport vehicles, but not much else drove out to begin the journey. Snow was beginning to fall and glimmered in the morning light. It was quite far to the port, and even at full speed would take almost a day. He wondered what the plan was. Sneaking in and attacking at dawn, perhaps. Or more likely, the commander had some secret weapon he hadn't shown, some new death beam. His thoughts continued in the fashion for most of the journey, except for the occasional breaks to refuel the vehicles, with what little fuel they had without the extra supplies. As they started to get closer, his thoughts became more and more imaginative. He had just embarked on this idea of a stealth super dreadnought descending from orbit and blasting the Acnics into bits, and they were there just to witness and didn't need to do anything. When he started to hear orders getting out, there couldn't be much gas left. One of them must have run out, he thought to himself. The earlier light snowfall had developed into a full-on snowstorm. Blistering wind and snow kept visibility to a minimum. Yet he could hear the commander shout orders. "Right, dismount! We're continuing on foot!" Of course they were. Just what he had hoped for. As they pulsed through the now thick snow against the wind, his fantastical thoughts started to fall to bits, and he wondered more and more if he was just walking to his death. What was actually the plan? They continued on, although no word of a plan reached his ears, even as they now must be getting very close to the Acnics. What would happen? Some other people were also deep in thought. The Acnic scouts had found that the entire enemy force had moved dangerously close, apparently to attack them. Close scrutiny had showed that they had not received seemingly any reinforcements from the humans. General alarm was sounded, and men filled the trenches preparing for an unlikely attack. While confused, commanders desperately tried to make sense of it all. For the young officer on the other side, things were no less confusing. The enemy had discovered them. No more sneak attack, if that was ever the plan. The human commander just looked into the snow-filled wind with a strange face and bellowed out an order. "Right! Prepare for attack!" He could only just look at him in stunned disbelief. This was the plan, was it? For once, his head won over his body, and his lips moved to speak his words. Commander! He shouted to get his attention. "Yes, what is it?" "This can't be right. Are we just supposed to charge them straight on?" "That's correct!" But... Huh? So we're going to charge them, are we? During a snowstorm, and an enemy that outnumber us 10 to 1 is dug in and fortified, and that knows where we are here. Oh, also, we are without vehicles, extra ammunition, and food. Don't worry! Oh, good. He had some kind of top-secret plan, perhaps some hidden tech, that hidden dread. They got all the vehicles, ammunition, and food we need, he said, and pointed in the direction of the enemy-held port. At this, he turned around and continued to watch the snow-filled wind with interest. Right, desertion it is then. He just had to walk through the blizzard to the vehicles without gas, then continue to walk all the way to base. That took almost a day at full speed with vehicles, without food. Right. Perhaps the commander had a point with what the port had everything they needed. A shame, really, that it also happened to be where the enemy troops were. But how are we going to be able to see who is a friend and who is an enemy? He was grasping at straws here. But when all you have is straws, you make a straw man. Oh, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Another don't worry answer, when there seemingly was so much to be worried about. Remember, they outnumber us 10 to 1, so odds of it being an enemy is about 10 to 11. At this, the commander smiled at his own unfunny joke. Enough of the chit-chat. The preparations are ready. He could see the chest build up like a balloon as the commander prepared to shout with every fibre, being "Charge!" And at that, the commander disappeared forward into the snow. Well, here goes nothing. He could see expressions similar to his own thoughts on the men running forward closest to him. Thankfully, the wind had turned so the snow didn't blow directly into his face. At that very moment, he thought, here it comes, the explosions, dying, but nothing happened. They continued forward until they could literally see the enemy trenches, despite the dwindling light and snow. As they opened fire at close point-blank range and rushed into the trenches, he could only see confusion and shock and how his now dead enemy eyes. Trench after trench was taken in the same fashion as the first. Stunned soldiers who at most managed to shoot a bit into the blinding blizzard before being overwhelmed. It wasn't long before they were at the port itself and had apparently been taken already when he arrived there. Prisoners of war had been herded into the corner of the large hangar bay, and the old human commander stood on a box in the middle. It looked like almost everyone was here. Their losses must have been minimal. And that is how you dance the tango! The commander smiled at his own unfunny joke. But this time, he smiled with him. He was alive. They had taken the port against all odds. Nothing could stop them now. End of story. Story number 2. It's in the Name, written by Hidden Fox. The sound of whirring motors and hissing pneumatics could barely be heard over the roar of the engines. Then suddenly, silence. The dropship roared out of the ship into dead silence of space. All right, you've all heard the brief. Remember, this is a Class H genocidal movement of the xenophobic superiority class. We cannot surrender. We don't have that option. Jack Corey surveyed his troops. The 6-pointed star under the corps banner stood out in the stark light of the dropship. Jack's statement was met with a grim acceptance. The soldiers in the dropship all knew the dangers of the corps when they signed up, but they knew why. The stereotype of the corps being mainly human would be both right and wrong. Historically, the corps was made up of almost only humans. Of course, that was when no one really knew about the corps. Awareness of the corps grew after their response to an attempted coup that threw an entire planet into civil war. Taking down the rebels, addressing the major issues, and repairing the majority of the planet's infrastructure before leaving put the corps on the radar. But stopping a terrorist attack on the capital station of Kahar, that skyrocketed them to galaxy-wide fame when it was broadcast live. Nowadays, non-human species were plentiful among the corps. Humans were still a large part of the corps, but that was mainly due to the long history with it. To list the sentient species that had members in the corps would take a long time. In fact, it would be easier to write a list of every sentient species that didn't have a member, and that would be a waste of paper, because the list would be empty. Every sentient species had members in the corps, and even a few non-sentient species were a part of the corps. The dropship breached the upper atmosphere of the target planet, screaming through the thickening atmosphere. Hundreds of dropships followed. Strapped in, Jack made sure his soldiers were too. From the pack hunters of the Phoenici to the plant-like Romo, they were all had grim determination on their faces or face analogues. The dropship bucked and twisted as it maneuvered to avoid incoming anti-air ordnance. It deployed flares and countermeasures often. The ground attack fighters rushed past, charging with impulsive determination to destroy their targets. They loosed missile after missile, firing molten plasma from their nose-mounted weapons. Orbital bombardment streaked through the air at the edges of the formation, precisely destroying important assets. The dropship began to pull up, the force being exerted on the crew inside. It soared the last few kilometers to the dropship. The soldiers inside began to unstrap themselves from the ship. As they primed their weapons, flicking off the safeties, the dropship began to slow. The rear door slid open, hovering a few feet above the ground. The soldiers could see countless other dropships doing the same. Jack was the first to jump out. The first galactic peacekeeping corps boots hit the ground, ready to do their duty. After all, it's in the name. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.